internet is in this environment, it doesn't discriminate whether you're a child or you're an adult or you're female or male. Once there is access, it becomes available to everyone around the place. But I guess there are some things that make internet available to people the way we know it. One is that the person must be digitally literate. And that's where sometimes women are at disadvantage in some countries and in some climes. You also have the issue of access. You want to be able to have internet when you want it. And because of the limiting factors, where in some places women are actually prevented from going to certain places or using certain gadgets and things like that, it becomes a big issue. Like he said here, the panel will deal heavily on many of these issues, which should break down some of the problems and, if possible, proffer solutions. So, I guess the panelists will be profiling solutions and maybe suggestions on how we can put some kinetic energy to the policy pronouncements that have been made in the past. I guess with the Director of ICT in the Ministry of Communications here, I'm sure she will also have a lot to say. So, with those few words, I'd like to say welcome to this panel, and I hope you have a very rewarding time. Thank you very much.
Today, the awareness is there that government alone cannot achieve the success. We don't have all the resources, and we don't have the attitude, the right attitude to getting things done. But with the realization that synergies must be created, there has to be collaboration between the private sector, the public sector, and even the academia. And we all understand the linkage.
So Ashna, you've heard Moni, she's talked about we need to have passion and love for action. And then she also talked about collaboration. What do you think the role of civil society should be in moving policymakers to action? What has worked in countries that you've been in, and what lessons can we take from that?
The UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities also obliges states to provide equal opportunities for persons with disabilities. Specifically, Article 9 outlines ensuring accessibility of ICTs, which include the internet, and also calls on states to ensure that private sector actors, service providers, including for the internet and related technologies, provide services and products that are accessible and usable for persons with disabilities. This, again, like has been mentioned earlier, would ensure that, in addition to the rural poor, the women, persons with disabilities also have the opportunity to realize the potential of technology for access to information, for empowerment, for engagement in civic and governance processes, access to information, and ultimately to development and improved livelihoods.
But what it translates for me to civic society and our responsibility as citizens is I notice in our public discourse, at the highest levels of our political discourse, the issue of access and digital transformation, the changing global economy, changing global value chains, is not really in our public discourse. Anytime now I see a high government policy, I think the previous current administration is just coming to an end. There were issues of they were doing test labs of what we were going to stimulate the economy. There's some consultant from Malaysia. You look at the ERGP ICT and some of these plans, I'm always looking, where's ICT in the hierarchy? You know, what are we saying about access of technology for our people? It's when we talk about infrastructure, talk about electricity, which is really critical. When we talk about transportation, I couldn't agree more. And it's the ICT infrastructure. You know, if we have the roads and we have electricity in the 21st century, ICT is the biggest lever that's going to give our youth access to information, to acquire knowledge, to empower themselves, to access global markets, to deliver services virtually, to generate economic outcomes.
So the floor is open now. Let me see the hands up, then I will know how to manage my time.
I see one problem most of the time. When you recommend something that it's going to help the organization, going to help the community, it's pushed beyond your level. Okay, I make a recommendation to my head of department. He push it to the director. Director push it within the management meeting and they push it to the board. When it gets to the board, I'm not there to defend it. My manager is not there to defend it. And within the board, there's no any IT guy or an IT inclined person. They look at it and they look at the financial implication. I mean, why do we need to spend this much on IT? Why? What? Please let it be. They just dump it there. It died naturally.
And my research led me to the work done by Min1, like a collaboration as well with CCO, and how Min1, ensured that CCO had access to internet. And it just kept, I just kept asking myself questions that why, NCC came across with the harmonized strategy, why are state governments not, implementing it? What could be the issue? And it all boils down to how can we drive more policy implementation, because we can continue to talk about these are the ideas we have, this is what we want to achieve, but how can we ensure that it comes to life? Thank you so much.
I wanted to talk about the implementation of policies in ITC, how it is really difficult to get the right partners and to get people engaged into it. The example that I'm going to take is a very simple example that people don't care about it, especially here in Africa, and talking about Cameroon in particular, is identity of students in university. It's very important because I've been through internet, for example, for research, and I want to access international libraries. They ask me from which institution I am. And they have all the information about institutions around the world, but they ask me to give my university identity access. And that's where I have noticed that, in fact, in universities, it doesn't exist.
For the university, and the issue of identity management, I absolutely agree with you. I think we have similar issues in Nigeria. I think African individuals and institutions need to be online, and our identities need to be registered online. In this new virtual world, everything from access to services, criminal activity, law enforcement, security, people need to have digital security or digital identities, otherwise you're really not kind of recognized to the rest of the world. Most of our countries do have policies and agencies in this regard, but implementation is still lagging. You mentioned, is it a top-down or a bottoms-up approach? I think it needs to be both, and I think we need to be a lot more vocal.
So there is something about the role of the civil societies here. They must not keep quiet. They must learn about the importance of ICT and drum it as loudly as possible, and also identify state governments that are doing well and criticize those that are not doing well and demand that certain things be done. I know that in this audience we don't just have Nigerians. I guess it's the same thing for other countries that are here present. That aspect of demanding what you think is right for you is very important, and not just accepting anything that happens and we take it that way. So my last point is on education. Internet is intertwined with education. You can make a phone call without ability to read and write. But if you have to operate on a digital platform, you must have basic skills of reading and writing, or at least using a keyboard. So the issue here is that as we are talking about digital inclusion, we must also be looking at what can improve educational facilities both for the elderly and for the young. Because in those days we had education for matured people. That seems to be dying down a little bit. It's not as prevalent as it used to be some time ago. But this is the time, if we are talking about inclusiveness, if we are talking about my grandmother in the village, that grandmother better knows how to read something, whether in his native language or in English, and be able to even use a keyboard. And not to talk of our children. We are talking about teaching young people even coding from elementary school. And that is the kind of digital inclusion of the future we must be all aligned with, and be able to demand that government does what it's supposed to do. Like Funke said, you can be given a license. If the operating environment is not given, you can't actually do much. So we must demand that government does what it must do. Thank you very much.
I'd like to say thank you to all of you for participating, and a big round of applause for the panelists and for yourself as well.